Hi everyone. Were white women really attracted to black slaves during slavery? How frequent were sexual relations between white female slaveholders and black slaves? Did white women, slave owners, really feel attracted to black slaves? Did white slaveholder women really sexually exploit black slaves? These are some of the questions that we will try to answer in this video. For this work, we will concentrate mainly on trying to find the reason behind an interracial relationship between a black man and a white woman, which was legally prohibited for a long time and socially condemned by whites who are against racial miscegenation, cohabitation, or intermarriage between different racial groups. Can a white woman really fall in love with a black man with the same economic condition or social status during the slave system and racial segregation? Are there other reasons resulting from social morbidity, racial stereotypes, or personal taste? To understand why a white woman feels attracted to a black man, defying social criticism and family members. To know the answers to these questions, we must analyze this controversial topic from a historical context. Many historians are aware of the slave past in many of the American nations, either for religious reasons or trying to hide a reality that everyone knew or practiced in colonial times regarding marital relationships between slaves and their owners. We all know that talking about the marital relationship between a black man and a white woman was a topic that was prohibited to write or comment on at that time, much less be the main story in any type of romantic literature. Given the taboo nature of this type of intimate relationship between slaves and owners, many times this history of prohibited interracial relationships was hidden from the public to protect the reputation of the white woman, and even more so if this white woman was from high society who had the possibility of having slaves, but also to protect the lives of the slaves. When we look at the increase in the number of the mulatto population according to the population records of the colonial era, in many of these nations, we can all deduce the reasons for this number and the frequency of relationships between owners and slaves, regardless of whether they were due to rape or acceptance on the part of the slave. Male slaveholder were always the main protagonist of the increase in the number of the mulatto population, but they were also responsible for the increase and dominance of the mestizo population and the demographic history of these nations. But when we talk about the slave system in the British colonies, which are now known as the United States, the marital relationship between the slave owner and the slave was a practice that existed before the eyes of the entire world, different from the marital relationship or sexual between a white woman and a black man, which was hidden from the public, no matter if it was a slave man or a free man, mostly in the southern slave states for the reasons I mentioned above. The prohibition of marital union or concubinage between slaves and their owners, one of the dogmatic practices of Catholicism regarding marital relations before marriage, was something that not even existed on paper, and even more so when slave black women surpassed in proportion to white women, with an advantage of 9 black women to 1 white woman in many Latin American nations. How frequent were sexual relations between white female slaveholders and black slaves? Taking into consideration what was said before, that tells you that the possibilities of the marital union of a black man in his condition as a slave with a white woman during the colonial era was so unlikely due to the low availability of single white women of marriageable age. Maybe for that reason, to speculate about is something that very few historians dare to write on this topic, and even more so when historically we all know the submissive role of European women in a patriarchal society, where the man was the one who made all the decisions. This passive role of white women in colonial times tells us the reasons why white women had little chance of having any type of marital relationship with a black man. The black man, given his inferior character in a caste system, their low position in the social hierarchy in the southern plantations, having marital relations with a white woman was not socially permitted. One of the characteristics of the colonies, apart from the exploitation of natural resources for the benefit of European nations, was marital relations or unions in concubinage. At the beginning, single colonizers had relationships with indigenous women, resulting in a mestizo population in many of those colonies. Later, With the arrival of the slave population, racial diversity changed, but it also changed the character of the type of racial mestizos, which gave rise to the growth of the mulatto population, who replaced the mestizo population in numbers in many Caribbean colonies, where the slave population surpassed the white population. Type of marital relationship or concubinage, which was only reserved for white men with black slave women. But not so when we talk about the relationship between a white woman and a black man, which was condemned. Historically, we all know that the extermination of the indigenous population in many regions in America began the use of the black slave population from the eastern part of Africa, what is now known as Senegal, Nigeria, and the Congo, to do the hard work in these colonies. Many of them, slave women, apart from the hard work they did in the crop fields, were also subjected to the harassment from their owners. Regardless of the difference in social status within the slave system, experience has shown us that the needs of human beings surpass social and racial differences, especially when a man's ability to have a partner was limited by the number of white women available during that time in the colonies. Whether the colonies are Spanish, Portuguese, French, but also British. The question would be, what are the reasons that prompted white men to have relations, concubinage, or rape with black women? Many historians would use the same arguments used by me at the beginning of this article to justify this predatory behavior of the colonizers against indigenous women in the beginning and later against black women in their use as an object of pleasure. One of my answers would be because they could and had the power to do it, and even more so when you are the owner of that black woman. Why were there no marital relationships between black male slaves and white women? The answer is simple. White women could not enter into that type of marital relationship because they were prohibited, but they also did not have the power to do so. Contrary to what happened with white men when they were in a relationship with a black woman, which was prohibited but permitted. The union of a white woman with a black man would in many cases lead to the death of this black slave by his owner and the moral repudiation of this white woman by society. If you study the history of how slaves were treated in the slave system in the United States and later in the implementation of Jim Crow laws, the possibilities of a marital union between a white woman and a black man were prohibited by law. Despite these legal prohibitions, were the marital relations between a white woman and a black man? My answer is yes. How often did these relationships exist? It was something that until now, no one knows. At this moment, when we look back, we can only speculate, and even more so when we read the writings of white women who had relations with a black man, whether a slave man or a free man. We can talk about the ability of the black woman as objected during the colonial era and the reasons behind this desire of the white man for the black woman, apart from her availability of some qualities that the black woman possesses in comparison to a white woman of the white race, as the reasons for this preference. When talking about the relationship between a white woman and a black man, in many American nations, this marital relationship is still considered taboo, just as the white man desired the black woman as an object of pleasure. In the same way, some high society women used the black man as slaves to satisfy their most intimate sexual needs. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like this type of topic, leave your comments or share this type of material.